The room fell silent. Carter's words hung in the air, defying the grim reality. General Harlow looked at him with skepticism but remained quiet, as if weighing the impossible. "We don't have the resources to match them in a direct battle," Carter continued. "Our only chance is to outsmart them." Dr. Voss raised an eyebrow. "Outsmart the Zorvax? You're talking about an enemy that wipes out entire planets for sport. They have technology centuries ahead of ours." "That's exactly why we can win," Carter replied, his voice steady. "They're used to overpowering everyone they meet. They've never had to deal with a species like us, one that thinks its way out of every problem." The general was about to interject, but Carter held up a hand. "We're not going to win this through strength," he said. "We're going to win it with deception, misdirection, and a little bit of luck." The team exchanged uneasy glances, but the urgency of the situation left them little room for doubt. Earth's military might was crumbling, and the alien fleet, already scanning for weak points, was getting closer to Earth's atmosphere. Carter's team needed to act fast. As the minutes ticked by, a sense of helplessness gripped the world. News channels broadcast the imminent doom, showing images of alien ships descending into the upper layers of Earth's atmosphere, their immense size casting shadows over cities. Mass evacuations were underway, but there was no place to hide from such an enemy. In every corner of Earth, governments scrambled to formulate last-ditch defense strategies, but there was a common theme: the Zorvax were unstoppable. The enemy's weapons technology was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Their ships could render Earth's best countermeasures useless in seconds, leaving no hope for military retaliation. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Colonel Carter's plan began to take shape. The first step was creating chaos among the alien ranks. Earth's best hackers, working under the radar in secret bunkers around the globe, began infiltrating the Zorvax communications network. The aliens, reliant on sophisticated but rigidly structured tactics, had never accounted for the unpredictability of human ingenuity. The moment Carter's team deployed the first phase of their counterattack, the Zorvax began to experience a disruption they could not anticipate: a flood of false signals, misleading data, and phantom fleets. The Zorvax Armada, confident in their overwhelming power, didn't notice immediately. In their hubris, they believed they had already won. But it was the beginning of the end for them. Humanity's greatest weapon was about to make itself known. Meanwhile, inside the command center, the scientists worked feverishly to analyze the Zorvax's communication patterns. Dr. Voss was collaborating with her team of experts, piecing together intelligence that might give them a fighting chance. "I've got it," she exclaimed after hours of data crunching. "We can exploit their AI system. The Zorvax use artificial intelligence to coordinate their fleets, but the system relies on patterns. If we can hack into it and break the pattern, they'll lose their tactical advantage." Carter nodded. "Let's do it." The plan was risky. The moment the virus was deployed into the Zorvax systems, Earth's forces would be marked. Any failed attempt would likely result in immediate retaliation. The enemy wouldn't hesitate to obliterate anything that posed a threat. But it was the only shot they had. As the night wore on, Carter and Voss coordinated the final steps of the mission. Their best engineers had managed to create an artificial intelligence program that could mimic the Zorvax's language and input it into their battle network. The goal was simple: cause confusion, disrupt command structure, and sow chaos in the enemy's ranks. Carter stood over the massive console as the moment of truth arrived. He watched the countdown tick down. The whole world seemed to hold its breath as humanity's hope rested on the success of a virus, an abstract concept, in the end, but one that could change everything. 3, 2, 1, Carter said. He hit the button. For a long moment, nothing happened. The tactical display remained still, showing the Zorvax Armada in its imposing formation. Then, a blip appeared on the screen. Then another. Then the entire alien fleet began to shake as if a massive shockwave had rippled through it. Confusion spread like wildfire, and a feeling of triumph bubbled up in Carter's chest. They were winning. But the battle had only just begun. The chaos within the Zorvax Armada didn't take long to escalate. Ships that had once moved with perfect precision now floundered in space, drifting aimlessly or turning on one another as their communication systems collapsed. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a sliver of hope. Colonel Elias Carter watched the screen, his sharp gaze following the shifts in enemy movements. The virus had done its job, at least for now, but the Zorvax were adaptive, and their AI systems had already begun to stabilize. Carter knew they wouldn't remain vulnerable for long. The real challenge had only just begun. How could humanity keep the upper hand? "This is only a temporary victory," Carter said, speaking to the room of engineers and analysts around him. "We've broken their network, but they'll patch it up and come back stronger. We need to keep them distracted while we regroup." Dr. Renata Voss, who had been working tirelessly with the tech team, adjusted her glasses. "We need to force them into a situation where they'll continue making mistakes. We need to lead them into a trap, a series of calculated distractions that will exhaust their resources." Carter nodded. "Misdirection is the key. If we can create enough of a disturbance in their command chain, we can slow them down just enough for Earth's remaining defenses to mount a counteroffensive." The plan was set in motion with staggering speed. Humanity's remaining fighter jets, despite their outdated technology compared to the Zorvax's weaponry, would serve as the perfect bait. They would draw the alien ships into a series of skirmishes that would appear to be poorly planned human attacks. Meanwhile, hacker teams on Earth sent out false transmissions, fabricating intelligence reports suggesting the existence of human fleets that didn't exist. The Zorvax, accustomed to flawless communication, couldn't tell the difference. Their military hierarchy relied heavily on real-time information. Without that, their effectiveness would collapse. "Send them a new set of false coordinates," Carter instructed, watching the operations unfold on the massive holographic display. "Make it look like the humans are amassing an offensive in the outer belt. If they take the bait, it'll split their forces." Moments later, the ruse was in play. Human pilots engaged in harrowing dogfights in the outer reaches of the solar system, their outdated fighters darting and weaving in ways that didn't make sense to the Zorvax. To the aliens, it seemed like an army on the move, uncoordinated but deadly nonetheless. A portion of their fleet was drawn away from Earth's orbit to intercept the false human threat. The plan worked, and the Zorvax began scattering their forces, but Carter wasn't finished yet. He knew that without overwhelming firepower, humanity's success would rely on precision. The diversion needed to keep the aliens' attention for as long as possible. On Earth, the resistance movement, the very same underground cells that had sabotaged alien operations, continued to grow. They used the cover of the confusion to strike back at the invaders. Earth's population had learned how to survive under alien rule, but now, they had a chance to do more than just survive, they could fight back. Carter's team had long ago started coordinating with the resistance. Armed with vital intelligence from the human hackers, resistance cells planted explosives on Zorvax-controlled facilities and supply ships, sending a message to the invaders: humanity would not bow easily. Dr. Voss joined Carter in a command room, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's working. We've got them guessing. Their ships are jumping between false coordinates. I can't believe this is actually happening." "We've just started, Renata," Carter said with a smile. "Now comes the hardest part. They'll adapt soon enough, and we can't let our guard down." As expected, the Zorvax began adapting. Their AI systems, though momentarily overwhelmed, were regaining control. The humans' deception would only be effective for so long before the aliens began to realize they were being played. But Carter had planned for that too. The real secret to humanity's success wasn't just the deception, it was the aliens' arrogance. The Zorvax, accustomed to dominance, had never seen a species that could outthink them. And as Carter had anticipated, their confidence would be their downfall. "Prepare the next phase," Carter ordered. "We're going to give them something bigger to chew on." As the Zorvax regrouped and began to refocus on Earth's remaining defense systems, Carter and his team moved into position. Their next move wasn't just about deception, it was about drawing the enemy into a final trap. Let's see how they react, and they think they've already won, Carter muttered under his breath, watching the flickering lights of the Zorvax ships as they continued to hunt down humanity's decoys. And in the quiet depths of space, the final game of cat and mouse had begun. The Zorvax Armada was starting to adapt to humanity's tactics. Their once impenetrable communication networks were slowly coming back online, and their ships were regaining a semblance of coordination. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the invaders might be able to regain control. The Zorvax were far from dumb, and they were beginning to realize that the human attempts at deception were not just the last gasp of a defeated species, they were the result of carefully orchestrated strategy. But Colonel Elias Carter knew that humanity's best chance lay in one final act of audacity. The virus was humanity's trump card, a digital weapon that could turn the tide of the war and destabilize the Zorvax fleet permanently. "Time's running out," Carter muttered, pacing in the war room. The map of the Zorvax fleet flickered on the screen before him, a swirling mass of alien warships orbiting the Earth. Their movements had become more cautious, more deliberate, likely because of the early confusion humanity had caused. But if Carter's team couldn't act quickly, the Zorvax would adapt and retaliate. Dr. Renata Voss was at her station, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she reviewed the final stages of the Trojan virus's deployment. It had been months in the making, developed by a crack team of coders, engineers, and alien technology specialists. The virus was a work of art, a masterpiece of programming designed to infiltrate and corrupt the Zorvax's advanced AI systems. The Zorvax ships relied heavily on artificial intelligence to coordinate their vast fleet. Their systems were optimized for efficiency, each ship acting as a part of a larger whole, autonomous yet interconnected. If the virus could reach the central command hub, it could tear apart their entire command structure, sending the fleet into chaos. "Ready to launch, Colonel," Dr. Voss said, her voice steady despite the monumental stakes. She was the one who had devised the algorithm that would mimic the Zorvax's own digital signature, tricking their systems into thinking it was an authorized update. "Deploy it," Carter ordered. Without hesitation, Voss initiated the sequence. The virus was inserted into a captured Zorvax warship that had been retrofitted with human technology. Using this ship as a Trojan horse, the virus would be transmitted into the heart of the Zorvax network through their communication grid. If all went according to plan, it would spread like wildfire, corrupting the entire fleet from within. The seconds felt like hours as the transmission began. Carter stood silently, his eyes fixed on the countdown. As the Trojan virus embedded itself into the alien network, the first signs of disruption were subtle. A Zorvax frigate in the outer rim of the fleet suddenly veered off course. Its navigational system had been compromised, and its trajectory was thrown off. Then another ship, and another, began to experience similar glitches. The Zorvax fleet, massive and formidable, was beginning to show cracks in its armor. Dr. Voss watched the data pouring in, her heart racing. "It's working, Colonel. The virus is spreading faster than we anticipated. Their fleet is in disarray." Carter's lips tightened into a grim smile. But there was no time for celebration. The Zorvax, even disoriented, were not without resources. Carter knew they would quickly realize something was wrong, and the virus would need to be executed flawlessly to avoid detection. The first phase had been successful, but now the true danger lay in whether the Zorvax could counteract the damage before it spread too far. On the Zorvax flagship, a nervous silence filled the command bridge. Admiral Croth, a towering figure with scales of shimmering silver and deep green, glared at his officers. Their calm demeanor had dissolved into frantic activity as their systems began to malfunction. The AI that had once served as their flawless guiding force was now a liability. "Report," Croth commanded. "Admiral, we've detected a malicious program infiltrating our central network," an officer reported, his voice strained. It's scrambling our systems. We can't control some of our ships. It's like they've gone rogue." Croth's eyes narrowed. He had underestimated humanity, something he had never thought possible. He had assumed they were a primitive species, a fleeting insect beneath the heel of the Zorvax. But now, as the fleet descended into chaos, Croth realized that they had been wrong. Back on Earth, Colonel Carter's team monitored the fallout. The virus had triggered a chain reaction. Zorvak's ships were turning on one another, firing blindly into the void or colliding with each other as their command systems failed. What had once been a vast, coordinated armada was now a disjointed, panicked mess. "They're falling apart," Dr. Voss said in disbelief. "The fleet's losing its cohesion." Carter leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the flickering screens. "We've got one shot at this," he said, his voice low but filled with determination. "If we can keep them off balance just long enough, we can finish what we started." But just as the humans began to celebrate their success, a warning light flashed on the console. The Zorvaks were adapting faster than expected. Their ships had begun to isolate the source of the virus, and the AI was working overtime to patch the breach. "We need to act now," Carter said, urgency flooding his voice. "Before they fix it." The countdown was on. The first part of the plan had succeeded. Now, humanity had to deliver the final blow before the Zorvaks could recover. The Zorvaks were recovering faster than anyone anticipated. The Trojan virus had caused chaos, yes, but now the alien fleet was beginning to reorganize. Ships were rebooting their systems, isolating infected nodes, and severing communication between damaged vessels. The Zorvaks' adaptive AI was learning, evolving. And in the heart of the flagship, Admiral Croth was orchestrating the counterattack with cold, calculating precision. "This isn't over," Croth growled, his hands gripping the arms of his command chair as his officers scrambled to contain the damage. "Send out the emergency signal to the rest of the fleet. We need to neutralize this human infection before it spreads further." Despite the chaos, the Zorvaks were not helpless. They had long anticipated the possibility of an enemy like humanity, brilliant but unpredictable. While they had never faced such resistance, they were not blind to human ingenuity. And now, it seemed, humanity had crossed a line they couldn't afford to cross. But Carter was already preparing for the next phase of the mission. Back at Earth's command center, the stakes had never been higher. Carter's team had managed to inflict severe damage to the Zorvaks, but that damage was quickly being undone. The alien fleet was reorganizing at an alarming rate. Time was running out. Humanity had bought itself some space, but if they didn't act fast, the Zorvaks would regain control, and Earth's last hope would be extinguished. Carter stood before the tactical map, deep in thought. Dr. Voss paced behind him, her mind racing through possibilities. They had used every resource at their disposal, intelligence, deception, the Trojan virus, but they were still on the back foot. "We can't just keep throwing punches and hoping they land," Carter muttered, running a hand through his hair. "We need to hit them where it hurts, and we need to do it now." Dr. Voss looked up, her expression shifting as a thought occurred to her. "We've been focusing on the virus, the disinformation, and the distractions. But there's one thing we haven't tapped into yet, one thing the Zorvaks don't expect." Carter turned to her, eyes narrowing. "What's that?" "Their overconfidence," she said. "They believe their technology is invincible, that they can control everything with their AI systems. But if we force them into a situation where they have no choice but to rely on their instincts, we might just tip the scales in our favor." Carter's heart raced. "You're talking about a direct confrontation. But that's insane. We're not ready, our fleets are decimated, and their ships are too powerful." Dr. Voss smiled grimly. "We don't need to outgun them. We just need to force them into a situation where their AI can't predict what we're going to do. We fight on our terms, and we make them make mistakes." The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. It involved a small but highly skilled force, Earth's remaining elite pilots and special forces, deploying into the heart of the Zorvaks fleet. Their mission, to create a situation so unpredictable, so chaotic, that the Zorvaks would be forced to rely on their primitive instincts, throwing their AI systems into disarray. It was humanity's final gambit. Carter made the call. The operation, codenamed Operation Tipping Point, was a go. The best pilots, veterans of the early skirmishes, were briefed and prepped for the mission. They would fly in under the cover of the chaos the virus had created, infiltrating the heart of the Zorvax fleet and attacking key command ships. Their goal wasn't to destroy them but to provoke a response that would send the Zorvax into a frenzy. "This is it," Carter said, standing before his team of pilots. "We've played their game long enough. Now, we're going to change the rules." As the human fighters launched from Earth's remaining spaceports, Carter's eyes never left the screen. A small but skilled fleet of pilots, each carrying explosives and armed with the knowledge of Zorvax tactics, soared into the fray. The mission was high risk. One wrong move and the entire fleet could be wiped out before they even had a chance to strike. "We're running out of time," one of the pilots, Lieutenant Callahan, said over the comms. "We can't afford to be subtle anymore. This has to be bold." Carter's voice crackled through the comms. "Exactly. You're not just attacking ships. You're forcing them to react to you. You're creating the chaos that's going to shatter their control. Stay unpredictable. Stay wild." As the human fighters dove into the Zorvax fleet, all hell broke loose. The Zorvax ships, still trying to recover from the effects of the Trojan virus, immediately began to react. They fired blindly at the humans, their once disciplined formations now shattered in the face of the sudden assault. The Zorvax were thrown into disarray. But it wasn't enough. The human fighters needed to push the Zorvax even further, to draw them into a panic, to make them doubt their own systems. And then, just as the Zorvax flagship loomed overhead, the pilots pulled off the unthinkable. Using their inferior, outdated ships, the human pilots led the Zorvax into a narrow asteroid field, forcing the alien fleet to maneuver with their own limitations. The Zorvax AI had no training for this kind of terrain, no calculations for the kind of risk-taking humanity was known for. It worked. The Zorvax flagship, in its desperation to track the human pilots, made a fatal mistake. It broke formation. Several of its ships collided in the narrow asteroid belt, sending shockwaves through the fleet. A momentary hesitation spread through the entire command structure. And that was all Carter needed. With a single, calculated move, Earth's final force of fighters struck. A well-placed bomb detonated inside the Zorvax flagship's power core, causing a catastrophic explosion. The massive ship began to break apart, sending a ripple through the rest of the fleet. Carter's voice came through the comms, full of grim satisfaction. "We've done it. The Zorvax are rattled. Now, let's finish this." The explosion of the Zorvax flagship sent shockwaves through the entire fleet. The aliens had never experienced anything like it, destruction from within their own ranks, sparked by a force they had underestimated. In that moment, the fragile mask of their superiority began to crack. Across the battlefield, Zorvax ships faltered, communication lines broken, and what had once been a unified assault became a disordered scramble for survival. Admiral Croth, perched in the heart of his flagship as it crumbled, felt the full weight of the disaster. His eyes burned with rage as he barked orders, his voice rising above the chaos. "Regain control," he shouted, his claws digging into the armrests of his command chair. "I want those ships back in formation, now." But it was already too late. The Zorvax were floundering, unable to regain the upper hand. The human force had done what no one thought possible. They had exposed the cracks in the Zorvax's infallible technology. The very foundation of their empire was shaken. Back at Earth's command center, Colonel Carter stood before the tactical display, his heart pounding with a mix of triumph and disbelief. The Zorvax flagship's destruction had been the first step, but now, as more of their ships fell into disarray, the humans had their chance to strike a decisive blow. "Their flagship is gone, but we still have work to do," Carter said, pacing back and forth. "This is our moment. If we push now, we can break their fleet apart completely." Dr. Renata Voss, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and elation, turned to Carter. "We've weakened them significantly, but they won't give up without a fight. The Zorvax are a proud species. They'll rally. They'll adapt. We can't afford to let up." "I know," Carter replied, his voice steady. That's why we've got to keep them off balance. We need a two-pronged attack, decoys to distract them while we focus our fire on the remaining leadership. Dr. Voss nodded. I'll get the decoy system online. We can create false transmissions to send them into another frenzy. Meanwhile, Carter's mind raced. They had already made history by surviving this long. But this war was far from over. The Zorvax might be shaken, but they weren't defeated. Not yet. The human fleet, still small in comparison to the overwhelming might of the Zorvax, moved into position. Using a combination of subterfuge, speed, and sheer audacity, they launched a series of feints, small, coordinated strikes meant to mislead the Zorvax and create confusion. At the same time, humanity's best strategists honed in on the remaining Zorvax leaders, hoping to strike a final, devastating blow. The Zorvax had been trained for a war of brute force. They had never expected an opponent who fought with the mind as much as the weapon. Every human move was calculated, designed to create doubt, sow chaos, and strike at the heart of their enemy's strategy. On the Zorvax flagship, Kroth's anger was palpable. The destruction of his flagship had sent ripples of panic throughout the fleet, but he refused to show weakness. Despite the chaos, he had regained partial control of his command ship. The remaining Zorvax ships were rallying around him, their weapons powering up as they prepared to retaliate. We will make them pay for this, Kroth snarled, his eyes glowing with fury. Send everything we have at them. The Zorvax responded in kind, unleashing a barrage of laser fire and energy blasts in every direction. Yet, despite the overwhelming firepower, something was wrong. The humans weren't fighting the way they should. The Zorvax were used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force, but humanity had learned to think faster, strike harder, and survive longer than anyone had thought possible. Kroth knew he had underestimated humanity, but it was too late to admit defeat. His pride wouldn't allow it. The Zorvax would make their stand, and they would crush Earth's resistance. On the other side of the battlefield, Colonel Carter and his team watched the chaos unfold. The human fighters, operating with a level of coordination and ingenuity that far surpassed the Zorvax's expectations, had proven to be a formidable force. The Zorvax flagship's destruction had sent the enemy into disarray, but it was the deception and tactical brilliance of the human forces that was turning the tide. We're doing it, Carter said under his breath, watching the holographic battlefield. We're pushing them back. Dr. Voss stepped up beside him, her face a picture of determination. It's not over. We've got one more card to play. Carter looked at her. What's that? Voss smiled, a spark of mischief in her eyes. We send them a message. Something they'll never forget. On the Zorvax flagship, Admiral Kroth's rage reached its boiling point as the situation worsened. His fleet was faltering, ships drifting without order, and his command structure was crumbling. Then, just as he was preparing to issue a final, crushing blow to Earth's forces, a transmission came through. It was a message, a single sentence in Zorvax and human languages. You thought you could control us. You were wrong. The transmission hit the Zorvax like a physical blow. Kroth's claws clenched into fists as the reality of the situation sank in. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had turned the tables, and they weren't going to stop until the Zorvax were defeated. We've lost, Kroth growled under his breath. We've underestimated them, and now it's too late. As the Zorvax reeled from the blow, humanity's forces pressed on, each calculated strike bringing them closer to victory. The alien Armada was losing its grip on control, and Earth's defenders were poised to finish what they had started. The war was far from over, but one thing was clear: humanity had proven the impossible was possible. They had outsmarted the most powerful alien race in the galaxy, and they weren't about to stop now. As the Zorvax fleet teetered on the edge of collapse, humanity's forces knew they couldn't afford to hesitate. The momentum was on their side, but it wouldn't last forever. The Zorvax were a relentless enemy, and though they were shaken, they weren't beaten yet. The time had come for the final assault, and every pilot, every soldier, every strategist knew what was at stake. Colonel Carter stood at the helm of the flagship, watching as his fleet prepared to move in for the final strike. The Zorvax fleet was reeling from the earlier losses, but there was still a core group of powerful ships, Admiral Croth's personal fleet, that remained intact. These ships, though damaged, represented the heart of the Zorvax's command structure. If they could eliminate these vessels, the rest of the Zorvax armada would crumble. "This is it," Carter said, his voice firm but tinged with the weariness of a long and brutal campaign. "We hit them hard. We finish this today." Dr. Voss, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. "The virus has done its work. Their fleet is in chaos, but there are still pockets of resistance. If we don't hit them now, they'll adapt. And we can't afford that." Carter looked at her, his eyes full of determination. "Then let's make sure they don't have a chance." The fleet moved into position. Human ships, battered but resolute, surrounded the remnants of the Zorvax armada. The massive alien warships, though still formidable, had been significantly weakened by the earlier chaos. Zorvax communications were unreliable, their systems frail, and their leadership shattered. But their pride, never before challenged, was all that kept them fighting. Admiral Croth watched from his flagship, the last bastion of Zorvax power. His massive vessel, though still imposing, was now scarred and broken. The signs of humanity's clever tactics were evident everywhere: ruptured armor, damaged weapon systems, and failed shields. He clenched his fists, every inch of him burning with anger. "We will not fall to these creatures," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Prepare the last reserves. We fight until the last ship is burned." As both fleets moved closer, Carter's heart raced. It wasn't just about strategy now, it was about survival. Humanity's fleet had taken a brutal beating, but it was still standing. And standing was enough. With one final, coordinated push, they would throw everything they had at the Zorvax heart. "We've learned everything we can from their movements," Carter said, his fingers flying over the tactical console. "We've studied their weaknesses, exploited their pride, and now, we go for the kill." The plan was simple: divide and conquer. A series of decoy ships would create chaos within the Zorvax ranks, drawing attention away from the real target, the heart of the alien fleet. Meanwhile, a specialized strike team, led by Carter himself, would breach the Zorvax flagship's defenses and take out the command core. "This is our moment," Carter said to his crew. "We end this, right here, right now." The battle erupted with a deafening roar as the human fleet launched their final attack. Zorvax ships fired back with everything they had, their massive energy weapons lighting up the dark void of space. The soundless explosions shook the very foundation of Carter's ship. But humanity's fighters, agile and cunning, darted through the chaos, exploiting every opening, every vulnerability. Lieutenant Callahan, one of Earth's best pilots, led the charge. His fighter shot through the Zorvax defenses like a comet, evading the alien fire with precision. His squadron followed suit, each ship a well-oiled machine, taking advantage of the chaos created by the decoys. The Zorvax were no longer operating with their usual level of coordination. Each pilot could feel it, a shift, a crack in the armor. "They're cracking," Callahan said over the comms. "Keep up the pressure. Push them until they can't fight back." Back on Carter's flagship, the countdown to breach the Zorvax flagship began. It was a dangerous maneuver, but the only way to ensure the final victory. As the human strike team closed in on their target, Croth's voice came through the comms in a final act of defiance. "You will regret this," he hissed, his tone venomous. "We will burn your world to ashes." Carter's voice cut through the threat, steady and unyielding. "You won't get the chance." With a flash of brilliant energy, the strike team detonated their payload, sending shockwaves through the Zorvax flagship. The core of their command center erupted in flames, and the ship began to implode. Croth's flagship, once the symbol of Zorvax might, was now a burning husk. The battle had reached its zenith. As the Zorvax flagship collapsed, the remaining Zorvax ships faltered. The loss of their central command shook their already fragile coordination. The remaining fleet, their pride broken, had nothing left to fight for. The once unstoppable alien armada was now a collection of ships drifting in space, their weapon systems offline, their crews scrambling to salvage what they could. "Finish them," Carter said simply, his voice unwavering. Humanity's forces, now unified in purpose, descended like a storm on the weakened Zorvax fleet. Every strike, every maneuver, was calculated for maximum impact. The Zorvax could no longer mount a coordinated defense. One by one, their ships were neutralized, each explosion signaling the end of their reign. And then, as the final Zorvax vessel was reduced to a wreck, Carter stood at the edge of the command center, his gaze fixed on the shattered remnants of the once mighty alien empire. "We did it," Dr. Voss whispered, her voice filled with awe. Carter nodded, the weight of the victory slowly sinking in. Humanity didn't just survive, we won. The stars that had once seemed so far away, so unreachable, now felt within humanity's grasp. The war had been long, the cost high, but Earth had proven one undeniable truth: no matter how powerful the enemy, humanity's brilliance would always find a way to overcome. In the aftermath of the battle, the silence of space was deafening. The once mighty Zorvax fleet, shattered and broken, drifted in the void like a forgotten relic of an ancient power. The final remnants of their war machine had been destroyed, leaving behind only debris and the echoes of their prideful defeat. Humanity's victory was hard-won, but it was complete. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The Zorvax, the self-proclaimed masters of the stars, had fallen, not through brute force or overwhelming numbers, but through the sheer ingenuity, resolve, and adaptability of humanity. Colonel Carter stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out at the scattered wreckage of the Zorvax fleet. The battle was over, but the war for the future had just begun. Humanity had secured its place in the galaxy, but the cost had been immense. Countless lives had been lost, and many more would still feel the scars of the conflict for years to come. "It's over," Carter said quietly to Dr. Voss, his voice a mix of relief and somber reflection. "But the galaxy isn't what it was." Dr. Voss, standing beside him, nodded thoughtfully. "No. It's not. The Zorvax were just one of many threats. Now that they're gone, there's a power vacuum. New challenges will emerge. We've proven ourselves, but we'll need to remain vigilant." The human fleet had suffered its own losses, but it had endured. The survivors, battle-worn but determined, celebrated in quiet moments between repairs and reassessments. The war had been a turning point, not just for Earth, but for every species in the galaxy. The Zorvax's defeat had sent shockwaves across the cosmos, and the once distant stars now felt like a beckoning frontier, full of both promise and danger. Back on Earth, the political leaders who had once bickered and argued over the planet's place in the galaxy now stood united. The Earth Coalition, formed in the wake of the war, was tasked with leading humanity into the new age. They would rebuild, recover, and most importantly, establish humanity as a force to be reckoned with in the galactic stage. President Emily Monroe addressed the Global Assembly from the steps of the rebuilt United Nations headquarters, her voice firm and full of hope. "Today marks a new chapter for humanity," she began, her gaze sweeping over the vast crowd. "We stood against an enemy who believed they were unstoppable. We survived. We triumphed. And now, we stand united, not as isolated nations, but as a people with one shared purpose. To explore the stars. To protect our future. To ensure that never again will any force in the galaxy underestimate us." The crowd erupted into applause, but President Monroe's words carried a weight that extended beyond celebration. She knew that the future would not be easy, that the galaxy was vast and full of both wonder and danger. But humanity had already proven its strength, not just in its ability to survive, but in its ability to adapt and thrive. The stars were within reach. As the newly formed United Earth Space Command began to explore the far reaches of space, the lessons of the war lingered in their minds. The Zorvax had been beaten by humanity's wit, its resourcefulness, and its unyielding will to survive. The same ingenuity that had created Earth's greatest technological advances had allowed its people to stand toe-to-toe with one of the galaxy's most ruthless empires. But the galaxy was vast, and humanity was only just beginning to understand the forces at play. New allies would be forged, new enemies would rise, and new challenges would test the resolve of Earth's people. But with every step, humanity would carry with it the legacy of the war, a reminder that no force, no matter how mighty, could ever truly conquer the human spirit. Far from the bustling cities of Earth, on the edge of the known galaxy, a small fleet of human ships navigated through an uncharted star system. Among them was a vessel, the Voyager, the first to venture beyond the borders of the galaxy since the war. Its crew, a mixture of scientists, diplomats, and explorers, were tasked with the monumental responsibility of discovering new worlds, new civilizations, and new challenges for humanity. As the Voyager entered the unknown, its captain, Captain Sophia Lee, stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the swirling nebula ahead. Behind her, her crew moved with purpose, ready to chart the future of humanity. "Prepare for entry into the uncharted region," Captain Lee ordered. "This is what we fought for. A future. Our future." The Voyager surged forward into the unknown, its engines humming with anticipation. For the first time, humanity was truly free to explore the stars, and the vastness of the universe seemed to open up before them, full of endless possibilities. In the final moments, Colonel Carter stood once more on the bridge of Earth's flagship, his eyes gazing out at the stars. The war had taken so much from them, but it had also given humanity something invaluable, a united future. They had defied the impossible, and now, they were ready to shape the galaxy on their own terms. "We did it," Dr. Voss said softly from behind him. "We showed the galaxy what humanity is capable of." Carter nodded, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "We're not done yet. This is just the beginning." The stars sparkled with the promise of an uncertain, but bright, future. Humanity had outsmarted the greatest threat it had ever faced, and now the universe itself lay open to them. For the first time in history, humanity was the one holding the cards, ready to write its own story among the stars. And so, as Earth's ships embarked on new missions and new journeys, one truth remained unshakable. In the grand scheme of the galaxy, the Zorvax had been a giant. But humanity had proven that even the smallest, most unlikely of species could change the course of the universe, one clever idea at a time.